Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. I think it's a fantastic initiative. The reason I am here is because I am convinced that responsible business is not an add-on, but it is social justice that has to be the objective both of policy making and of business in the end. And business or money and profit is a means to that. I would have 4 remarks, and by the way, the handout will be made available by the organizers, and the handout was prepared by Julia Scherer, my colleague. And this is one comment for the organization, maybe on the next event. I am not an exception. We are here in the panels with all these nice 50-plus guys, white guys. And maybe on the next panel we would have the people who have done the work for us, the Julias of this world. So then we would have a very nice round of young and fresh people who are the experts. That said, my first remark is that CSR has gained public policy momentum. This is most of all the case in the international world. We of course know the OECD guidelines, we know the Global Reporting Initiative, and recently, very interestingly, the UN Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. And we have made last year a first report as Bertelsmann Stiftung to report where the OECD country stands, and this year we will make a report where it will be the global report where countries stand on the Sustainable Development Goals, and we will do that together with the Sustainable Development Solutions Network led by Jeffrey Sachs. So CSR has gained political momentum. Second remark, but CSR cannot be achieved by policy and by public policy alone. Why not? Number one, CSR is to some extent local. It differs per country and per culture, and also governments are rather volatile. We discussed it yesterday over dinner, but also Bertrand Badré addressed this volatility of governments. Sometimes in Bertelsmann Stiftung we think what we would wish from governments is that they are stable and they have a good agenda, where there are some examples of governments with a rather good agenda, like what I think the current French cabinet has a rather good reform agenda, but if it is stable, that has to be questioned. And then there are governments that have a very stable position like Russia, but the agenda is not so good. And then there are countries where you have none of them, like Brazil. And so the combination of a good agenda and stability is rather rare. We do not find it often. So CSR cannot be achieved by public policy alone. Public policy also builds often on the public opinion, so it relates to name and shame, but then you have the SMEs, they are not affected by naming and shaming that much, and you have the business to business, which is also not affected by reputation issues. So it seems to me sometimes that CSR is a game for retail multinationals, and this is something we have to counteract. CSR has to be executed and implemented in company systems, as was discussed. It has to do with compensation, recruitment, individual responsibility, and it has also to do, as we heard in the other panels, with leadership compass. And this leadership compass, I discussed yesterday over dinner. We could discuss it with also with our colleagues at the table. Sometimes it is, what is the leadership compass? In the end, it is the orientation on the well-being of the next generation, I would say. So social justice, if the compass is for the next generation, is that a good summary? Yes? Okay, good. Then my third comment, my third remark is about sector initiatives. So if to counteract the idea that it is something for retail multinationals, one should take a look at sector initiatives to include also local and regional alliances and also some other sectors than just the retail business to consumers. Let me give you 4 examples, and as said, they are also in the handout. The first example is the Forum Waschen, which is in Germany a forum for sustainable cleaning. So business, public policy, and public opinion media are working together there for sustainable cleaning. The second example is Effinergie France, which is focused on low energy and efficient housing. The third example is Svanenmarket. I don't know, are there Danish people in the room? Yeah, Danish speaking, yeah. Svanenmarket, is that something that you know, are familiar with?
Yeah, it's a brand.
It's a brand, good. It's a label indeed, and it's a label which helps to make a distinction between, you know, responsible business and other business, and I think it's quite successful in Denmark. The fourth is the Global Alliance of Banking on Values, of which also the bank where I am chairman of the supervisory board is the co-founder and member of. This is the Triodos Bank, not in Bertelsmann, but another function. And the slogan of Triodos Bank is money should roll, but you decide where. So what we do there is we take the money from savers, they entrust us funds, and then the credit portfolio is focused on sustainable business, both environmentally and socially. So this is partly a response to the question that a gentleman with the blue block shirt asked. A bank also can be the broker for savers who want to make their money work in credit portfolios. And it's interesting that this global alliance for banking on values is also growing very rapidly. And not only our bank is growing like 10-20% a year, but it's also interesting that the key figures of the members of the Global Alliance of Banking on Values are better than the average of the banking sector, which is quite interesting. So, the last remark is about if we look at sector initiatives and if we look at the role of public policy, which is limited, as I said, then what we need, in my view, is a smart mix. What could be elements of a smart mix? Number one, there is some evidence that employee coded determination would help, so that if public policy supports business in setting some rules for employee determination, you have better results than when that is absent. Reporting guidelines are still a very, very strong instrument where public policy can join forces with business. And the smart mix also could reach out to stakeholder dialogue where business or politics can start. But if business starts, policy should be involved. And also there you can generate new knowledge. There you can create value. If you generate knowledge, I think it was one of our speakers this morning. I think it was Jean-Christophe who said that knowledge is a commodity that if you share it, it becomes more. It doesn't become less. And I was thinking that also. Love is a commodity that if you share, it becomes more and it doesn't become less. Yeah. And please allow me also to refer to a person who was very inspirative for me and whose story is in the Bible, and he had so much love that he could even, by sharing food, he could even make more food. So if there is enough love, you can even make more. So sector initiatives are also important, as I said, in a smart mix, and sector initiatives are things that public policy could reinforce and also could give legitimacy. So I don't want to take too much of your time. In a smart mix, employee co-determination, reporting guidelines, stakeholder dialogue, and sector initiatives. And with this, I think I have maybe given some first ideas. Yes, thank you.
So, Daniel and Simon, we have a menu here of smart mix of public policy, business input, and lots of love. Can we have some reaction maybe from what Aart has presented to us?
Look, I think an awful lot of common sense has been spoken, and I think it has at the conference as a whole. I've been here for most of the last 24 hours, and I'm very impressed by the examples that I've seen. I'm not an apologist, though, for the private sector and for free market companies. I mean, I do believe that the free market capitalism has brought more progress to humanity in the last 70 or 80 years than anything in human history before. So I believe passionately in the free market and in capitalism. I just think there's a particular responsibility on those of us who believe in the free market to call it out when things go badly wrong. And they do go badly wrong frequently. I mean, we've talked a lot about the breakdown of trust. In this country, at least, there's a breakdown of trust in virtually all sectors. And I still have far more faith in the private sector than I do in governments. So I make no apology for that. I used to run the Private Equity and Venture Capital Association and in this country. And Paul Miners, Lord Miners, who had quite a lot of private equity experience and was our minister, our city minister, simply said that it was good business practice to behave decently, openly, and transparently, because he said it is simply easier to do business if you are not viewed with suspicion by your customers, your suppliers, the unions, your regulators, and the people with whom you do business and whom you wish to employ. It's simply better business. So what enormously impresses me is when I see companies like Unilever that are listed companies on stock markets that have made a great success out of behaving in a long-term positive way and brought great benefit to society as a whole. So to me, it's a term of the horizon that is so important. Colin has written quite eloquently about how a lot of companies have become rent extraction machines for their shortest term shareholders. To me, that's the real problem with the free market at the moment, and that's what we need to try and curb. And at the Institute of Directors, we've always believed passionately in shareholders' rights, but I think we also need to start looking a bit more at whether you need variability in governance structures in order to build in more medium and long-term thinking. And I suppose that's what I'd like us to be focusing on.
Yeah, and we'll come back to the point of governance. But I mean, you say better business practice make common sense, but it hasn't really been necessarily common practice. I mean, Daniel, can you maybe share your thought on what you see, how you would characterize the external forces that are putting pressure on the system currently and driving this change in business, better business practice?
Well, yeah, with pleasure. Can I come back to two?
Yes, please, by all means.
Two small reactions, which I think also will answer your point. You refer to love and to sharing, mainly to sharing. I would make the link to ownership. I think we are, the reign of limited ownership is behind us. And that's a main force which presently, in my view, acts against the evolution we should do. At this stage, and I think it's true, unfortunately, in most business schools, I hope except this one, when students come out of business schools, when you ask a question to the business leaders, who owns the company, the answer is 95% the shareholders. It's a wrong answer. But it's still what most of the people believe. The shareholders own the company and have a limited, a non-shared, just to make the link, a non-shared view of ownership. If the company belongs to me, I can take the profits, I can say this company has been set up, as unfortunately almost all civil codes still say, I'm speaking for countries which have the civil code, a company is set up by the shareholders to share the profits. So as long as we think in that environment of ownership and restricted ownership to my own benefit, there is no limit to greed. So that's one point where things need to change seriously, and firstly in places like this one. So that's why it is such a good idea to make this conference here, and congratulations to the people who organized it. Govern what a company is, what an enterprise is, what a business is, how all of this interacts, needs to be taught in a different way as it is still today, and it was for the last 30 years. My second comment is, you refer also to personal convictions, and Bertrand, to a certain extent, referred to also earlier. We have the impression we are persons, we have our convictions, but then when we get to our professional life, we just have to forget them at the entrance and then work for somebody called the shareholder, somebody nobody knows, an institution somewhere, an institutional investor somewhere. And my aim every day is to make sure that he gets the highest, to maximize his shareholders' value. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I cannot long-term, if I am an employee, I cannot long-term be motivated by that aim. So we have to stop the fact that the way of departmentalization of the person, whether it works or when it doesn't work. So we have to have the whole person being able to act with its convictions from the moment it awakes until the next moment it awakes. Bertrand, you made the point, we are not schizophrenic when we have convictions. When we're an employee, we should have, or a consumer, we should have the same convictions than when we are an investor. I'm afraid, that goes a little bit against what I just said, I'm afraid that in practice it's not true. People, when they invest, they select the investor which makes the highest return, and the same one may maybe 1 hour later be in the street arguing against one of the practice of a company in which it invests. So we have to get out of that departmentalization and be in our professional life, be able to argue and be able to express our convictions. That being said, and that will be my last comment, and I think it's an important comment on basis of what I heard yesterday. Our responsibility is unlimited, and a company's responsibility with the world in which it works is, I agree, unlimited. But its power to act is limited. We have to forget the license. We have to remember that the license to operate that we get from society is limited to our purpose. So, and I think that's very important to avoid large disappointments in the future. A company cannot do anything because there is a problem somewhere. It has been recognized as a legal person, but for a specific project, it has no sovereignty, it has no legitimacy to act, in my view, outside of that scope. And if it acts outside of that scope because it considers there is a problem, it should do it in the right framework. I think we have to be careful there, not to create...
What are the risks?
Well, the risk is that, there are two risks. First, companies have a huge power, obviously, much bigger than any of us here. And that power has been given without any check on almost any check. That was not the case in the past. Almost any check. Nobody knows exactly what that company can at one stage do. There is no democracy in a company, and there will never be. So the legal personality has to be limited to what it has been allowed for. That's maybe one of the reasons. And the second reason is to avoid disappointments by society. There is, we already said it several times, there is very great mistrust against businesses. Let's not improve it. Today we are increasing the expectations. Look at the mission statements that companies have. Some of the companies which are here have very nice mission statements, and they respect them. But some of the companies, I'm not giving names now, you would be astonished by the mission statement. If you read them, you find, for example, my mission is to satisfy my customers, the communities in which I work, etc. 15th line, you will find the shareholder. If that is not mirrored in the boardroom, you'll create large expectations and larger disappointments, and that will destroy, in a horrendous vague, everything we discuss here. Sorry, I have been...
profoundly disagree with what you just said.
Yes, please.
Because I think
Yes.
it is completely wrong.
Okay.
There are plenty of checks on the ways companies behave in our society. There are plenty of legal and regulatory checks. In fact, they're surrounded by them. But there are also the checks of shareholders and of boards. And the vast bulk of boards in our Western democracies actually behave in an extraordinarily responsible, positive way most of the time. And these shareholders aren't kind of amorphous, odd, anonymous figures in top hats and frock coats as they might once have been. They are our pensions. They are the pension funds of the ordinary people of this country and other countries, and we depend on them. And fundamentally, it's absolutely vital that these companies show a return. Now, not a return at any price, not causing damaging externalities to the community. That would be bad practice. And not trampling on everyone else's rights. They have to recognize that their employees, their suppliers, the people who are dependent on them, their communities, they are a part of that whole, which is why thinking positively in the medium term about the environment you are working in is good business. And why ripping people off in the short term is always bad business practice. But it is bad business practice. Companies have to make a return, and when I'm investing for my pension, I want to see returns. I'm not making a social commitment. I believe good private sector businesses working honestly operate in the public benefit. That's the invisible hand principle. That goes back 300 years, and it is what has created the level of wealth and prosperity that we have in this country and that we increasingly have in other countries in our Western community and that are raising living standards across the world. So let's not be too apologetic about it. I certainly admire and respect the great companies we've seen today that have a fine social purpose. I certainly welcome the existence of companies that have a purpose well beyond profit. But returns really matter. They are very important, and they can't just be shuffled off. And actually, politicians, governments, would have nothing at all if it weren't for the private sector, because governments don't generate revenues, taxes. Governments spend money. It's the private sector that we're dependent on, and getting it right is what needs to be done.
Did you want to react?
Yes, well, I am not a lawyer, so I will not continue this debate. I represented 30 years ago the trade unions in all these big pension funds in the Netherlands. And there the number one was that we wanted the security for our members to have a decent payout in the end. Now what I notice is that a decent payout and also a sustainable future for our children, which is the compass idea, now is coming closer, and this is a boardroom discussion also in pension funds. So I would say maybe it's not completely black and white, although I would welcome if Oxford University or the Saïd Business School would take up this kind of a debate, or maybe one of you, to make indeed some study on what is the role of extended or limited responsibility in the juridical sense when it comes to sustainable business behavior. Sometimes I think that the fact that we introduced Gesellschaften mit beschränkter Haftung and that we introduced limited companies also limited to a certain way the responsibility of the owners. And sometimes I have the ideas that companies that are owned by families have, because they are people, have more chance to develop a long-term sustainable compass. But that is maybe a subject for further research. What is the role of of the different juridical models on sustainability would be a very, very important point for research. Where I disagree with you is the point that you say that governments just spend money and private sector generates money. Well, as an ex-politician, I could say that it was my ambition, at least, to create value. How? That was to invest in people, to bring people from disability pensions back in the labor market and to invest in the human capital. I think it is one of the great mistakes in politics is that we have too short a horizon and that we think that spending on education is cost, while it is in fact an investment. And if you think of human capital as something that is part of social justice and for the next generation, and if you think that companies also have a part of that, then one could think visionary of an alliance for creating value where money is just instrumental for the transaction between the sectors and it's not a goal in itself.
No, I don't disagree with that. Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
We're ready then.
We're back to love creation. Great. So,
Well, I did not want to make a special thing about love. I just wanted to say that,
it's a nice touch.
like knowledge, it is something you can share.
it's a very nice touch. So I would like to go back to the discussion you alluded to around the structure of board and the suitability of corporate governance. I mean, if we talk in terms of better business practice, that for business to do well and sustain the ability to do well by doing good, which is the thesis of today's, is the structure of the board fit for purpose? And Daniel, I'd like to bring you in as well. Do we need to rethink the way boards are run? Are they getting the right information? Are they meeting at the right frequency? I'm just interested to have sort of a critical review of the governance of boards from your perspectives.
Look, I don't think there's any one right governance structure. I think companies ought to operate in different ways and in ways that suit them. But I think fundamentally a board that is accountable to shareholders, but that thinks widely and acts in the medium and long-term interests of a company as a whole is the best sort of structure we've got. And I do believe that it ought to be shareholders who make those decisions ultimately and who choose them. Now, are companies wise if they include, for example, worker representatives or take into account worker views on a voluntary basis? Yes, I think that's good. I think that's good practice. But should it be laid down by statute? I don't think it should. I don't think it's been seen to work any better in Germany to have compulsory worker representatives than it does in Britain. I think good corporate practice that answers to your shareholders but bears in mind the interests of stakeholders as a whole is how boards ought to be. To that extent, what's really important is that we break out in this country of the old boys club where anyone who's been chief executive or finance director of any FTSE 350 company can be a non-executive director of any other company. So I think the pool has to be widened. Big focus on gender balance, and I agree with that. I certainly agree with that, but I think there are other balances too. Age balance is a big one in this country. There are 3 members of FTSE 100 boards who are under 40. And in my view, that's a scandal. No, it's not a scandal in terms of justice and social equality. It's a scandal in terms of business opportunity. Because think how many opportunities are being missed because there aren't people under 40 who are up to speed with new technologies and changing trends in society. Think how many opportunities are being missed. To me, these are good business practices. And encouraging diversity of thought on boards with lots of independent directors who are there as non-executives and who represent the widest cross-section of the community seems to me good business practice.
Right. Daniel.
I think that boards work actually as they more or less fairly well as they are structured now, and I would agree with actually everything you said. So I won't repeat it. The question again, I come back to my point of definition. What a corporation is: a legal entity, a legal fiction. It's a fiction, huh? Which is created to enable a business to carry out its purpose. That's what it is. So what is really important is the business. When people set up a company, if we have now a project, for of us, we have a project, a business project, our aim is not to set up a company. That comes afterwards because we need it. So that's important in my view, in terms, that has an effect on all governance issues. Again, and I come back to this point, and maybe I expressed it too strongly before, but we have made a number of reforms of governance and of regulations over the last years, and most of them are not very good. Because we have to pay attention for what we are going to make tomorrow, and remember that. Here we have criticized, and I come back to the topic, we have criticized very strongly, and everybody agrees, on the quarterly reports. Well, after Enron, everybody thought that quarterly reports were good. There were no, obviously, today everybody's against. People react, and regulators mainly, I don't know if you would agree with that, act after the last crisis and the view of the last crisis. Maximization of shareholders' value was considered in the 80s as a progress against captation of power by managers. So we have to pay attention. What is important is balance of powers. A company has a number of stakeholders. The board has to pay attention to all of them. Then it can, and I do really not disagree with you, it can obviously put its focus of 7 years, for example, on the shareholders' return. I'm not, obviously, but it has to look at all stakeholders' interest, because it's a system, the company is a system with sub-elements, and if one sub-element doesn't work, the whole system doesn't work. So yes, the board should be mainly populated with independent directors. It has a duty to look at all stakeholders' interests, clearly, and to arbitrate. I also agree with you, it does not need to take into account one given stakeholder interest to have a representative of that stakeholder in the board. I don't think that's it's more important, does it work, looks at their interest and takes it into account. You have a very nice recent case in Canada of Lowe's takeover of Rona. They tried in 2012 and just threw out a price and failed. They came back in 2015, and it was early 2016 even, and now in their offer, they took into account the whole stakeholders' interests. And the board made a very nice statement. It's really important that it was in Quebec, very nice saying that offer, responding the various stakeholders' interests, and having a good price, obviously, having the right price, better than 2012, it 100% recommended the offer.
So, I mean, all that you would suggest is voluntary. You don't suggest that regulation should, for example, determine how companies should report metrics on, beyond financial metrics. I mean, there's cases, I think in South Africa, there's integrated reporting is a legal requirement. Don't know whether that, they report on human capital, social capital. I don't know whether that has led to different outcomes, but I'm interested in if regulation has a role, what role it has, and how can we create a more constructive relationship between business and policymakers that are constantly criticized to overreact after the event.
Well, I'm actually a member of the Integrated Reporting Council, so I certainly believe in integrated reporting, but I do think it ought to be on a voluntary basis, at least for the present, and I don't think you can be too prescriptive in terms of what you require a company to report on. When I ran the Private Equity and Venture Capital Association, there was no requirement to report on private equity in this country. And we came up with a voluntary code that actually gave a lot of information, more than for most listed companies, because of a view that, especially if you're regarded with suspicion anyway, which private equity is, then being as transparent as possible about the social, economic, environmental consequences of what you do is a very good idea. And that's, in this country, that's run on an entirely voluntary basis. And it's extremely effective. I don't think there have been any political attacks on private equity here from that perspective. So these things don't need to be run by governments. And believe me, when governments get involved, they do stuff it up. Politicians will not get it right. And that's one of the reasons of course, some.
Go on.
I mean, in my view, regulatory transparency on pay in this country, the requirement to report on chief executive salaries, particularly in this country, has had a totally perverse effect. Because far from shaming chief executives, it's actually exacerbated it. And they all, I've worked with them all. They look at the chief executive down the road and say, he's doing a much worse job than I am. I want another 2 million. And that's why you get people, the CEO of Reckitt Benckiser gets a £23 million pay package. But what we are seeing is shareholders calling that in. BP, 59% vote against the chief executive's pay package. I mean, that is significant. In France, the vote at Renault against a great businessman, Carl Ghosn, but saying he should not be paid that much. This is shareholder activism, and I hope it will grow, and there'll be much more of it. The BlackRock, the Larry Fink's letter, Warren Buffett's position on short-termism and short-term reporting, absolutely terrific stuff. We need more of that. And we need more of that, not bluntly governments legislating or regulating, because they won't get it right.
Any reaction?
Yes. Well, some regulation about co-determination of workers helps. I think Germany in general performs better when it comes to responsibility than countries who have that than others. There is some scientific evidence, but maybe Julia can explain that later too. Although, take Volkswagen, co-determination is not at all a guarantee for such a thing. And this is quite a nice example where the culture was a culture of instruction and delegation without a two-way street of communication. So if the culture is not right, then regulation as such would not bring anything. Now I think that here politics and business need each other. Like, are you familiar with this play tool of the Harlequino with the two strings, where the Harlequino goes up? Recently I got a grandchild, so I'm now familiar with it again. Two strands and the Harlequino is in the middle, and when you pull here, it goes a little bit up, and then you pull there. But if you lose two, then everything goes down. This is how I see that politics and business should work should pull on both strings and should reinforce each other now, and then you will have a good result. So I think also here I call it a smart mix. Maybe a maximum pay is is perverse. Maybe a minimum wage is a good thing. So there are mixes, and too much regulation will kill also responsibility and will have perversive effects, and will destroy a culture where people take responsibility. If there is not any rule at all, then it also will not work. I had, in the time that I was Minister of Employment, I wanted to introduce a new law on childcare, on the quality of childcare. And my people in the department were working on it, and they said, no, we will not do that. We will ask the union of the parents of the children and the unions of the exploiters of the childcares. And 6 months later, faster than any politician could do, they had an agreement. I said, okay, thank you very much. And I put this agreement in the law, and that is law. And people would say, oh, this is very, very difficult and dangerous. I said, no, this is the only way to do it. Ask the people what the code should be, and then they will punish the bad boys who don't want to follow the rules. but it also can be a code that can be renewed, that can be more flexible, and also with the voice of the stakeholders. So a kind of smart mix of politics and business to work together to create codes of conduct. I think this is the future.
Yeah, a French person could not disagree with that because of our history and of the presence of the French state in business. However, we have so many examples of dysfunction that I would wish, and I think that's really what is discussed here. Is that the company becomes more and more or much more responsible than it is average. I'm not speaking of the people who are here, obviously, but all the other ones, the 99% of companies which are not yet here. So you have to provide for a bigger room next year. It's really important that responsibility and that sense of stakeholders' interests be incorporated in the boardroom. If not, the regulator will act. And it usually acts on basis of the behavior of the worst in class. And that's bad, because and that it makes the life of everybody much more complicated. I gave one example earlier. I could give another one, which, after the quarterly statement, the fair market value. Fair market value, being obliged to evaluate any participation you have on basis of the spot price, of the price at a given day, is exactly acting against every sentence which has been made in this room. Coming back to your point, Bertrand, earlier, should some regulations be changed? Yes, because some, we mentioned some. You spoke of remuneration. In the US tax code, you have one specific obligation. In order for the executive compensation to be fully deductible, it must be performance related, and that means, it's clearly in the tax code, related to objective financial criteria, such as EBITDA, etc. That's exactly against everything. So that's immediately, we should tomorrow all act asking to change that. Those are very practical measures which have an importance.
Great, thank you. I need to open up for questions. We have, I think, 8 minutes for questions. So, where's the mic? You have the mic? If you can go to the lady, just here, the lady here.
Thank you. I'm Isabella Bunn. I'm here at Oxford and also professor of ethics in the United States. I have a question. Since we're talking about law and policy, we have a new brand for mistrust, Panama Papers. Mm-hmm. It's amazing how quickly that would come into currency. And I was wondering if the panelists could comment on, obviously, the questions it raises about trust, about transparency, about potential corruption, money laundering, and of course, corporate ownership and beneficial ownership. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman at the back, and Bertrand. And the gentleman with the blue top there. Sorry. Yes. I'm just being... Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Andrew Dale. I'm an MBA here at Saïd. One of the things that I've really taken away is we've talked a lot about institutional wealth, and we've talked about very established companies and very big numbers. How do you, as policymakers, handle small startups or innovations? And from the comment from the previous panel of, while the U.S. isn't aware, one of the things that we've talked about is it's the Silicon Valley model that's been tried to be copied around the world in terms of innovation and small startup hubs, and entrepreneurship's a focus here at school. What are your thoughts on a policymaker of how do you encourage entrepreneurship and innovation for very small companies, but also corporate social responsibility as those company grows, and how do you manage that, or as a policymaker, to try to have the best of both worlds?
Great, and last question.
It's as much an addition than a question. On remuneration, I think it's a very interesting topic. I was invited by one of the leading advisory firms in the world, starting with an M, in the middle of 2008, to discuss the state of the finance in the world. And I made the comment at that time that if the financial world was unable to self-regulate its compensation, sometimes the regulator and the legislator might step in and do stupid things, because that was the price to pay. And they laughed at me, and they say, this will never happen, this is impossible. And look what happened. I mean, the EU started, and now the US are regulating and determining the way people are paid in banks and other worlds. So this can happen. So that's my point. Don't waste the opportunity. It's not that absurd. I don't think this is the right way to do these things. I don't think the legislator is good to fix and set up the compensation. But if we are unable to control ourselves, that's the end game.
Great. And as that was a very helpful comment, I'm going to ask Gérard Passerieux to make a comment, a question.
Thank you very much. Régis Passerieux. I used to be a long time ago politician and a civil servant, and now for years and years lawyers, and then business consultant for multinational companies between France and China. There is a huge gap between the fact we didn't emphasize any basic norms for 20 years in international trade, and that now we want to reach a new point, much more sophisticated, because the economy are embedded in a more and more complex supply chain network and business. And we work on it today, but the gap is huge. And in front of the government is the international regulator. So my question is, because of the, as Bertrand said, behind the government they are voters. And I would say that we have to consider this point of view. And as he said, the schizophrenia of the voters. I would say that a retired teacher of Oxford University, as a retired, want a good pension from the fund, and as a consumer, wants to consume a product with high level of standard of social responsibilities. But finally, as a voters, what we will do? We wait for a revenue, mainly. That there is a point for the government to do, no, in front of this gap, in front of this complexity, is probably to be able to issue very readable, simple measure in order to go further than soft laws, report what nobody's, in fact, at the end, are going to read, or index of seals, of guidelines. We have to, you don't believe that we have to go further, no? Further soft law, further lack of international regulation, and to find key measure, readable, to reveal in front of the voters, the stake, what we have to do. And my question is, do you imagine some of this type of key measures in criminal law, in consumption norms, or KPI for tax regulation? Can you imagine 1, 2, or 3 key measures in order to put the things in a national debate in front of the voters?
So you mean international standards?
On government, on local standards, on national government standards, because...
Okay. Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to just
Thanks.
start off. On the Panama Papers, look, I think fundamentally what shows is that there are dishonest people around, and there will always be dishonest people, and they need to be pursued. And to that extent, I welcome what the Panama Papers has brought out. But actually, in a country like Britain, I don't think there is a great deal of corruption in business or in public life. There's some, but I don't think there's that much. And I think transparency and openness is the best way through. I particularly like the point that was raised about startups. And one thing the Institute of Directors is trying to do is get rather fewer people who've made it and are sort of sitting on their piles in the IOD, and rather more small startup companies. And something we're trying to say to people is that, to younger people, is that the best thing you can possibly do in life is start up your own business about whatever it is that you're keen on. And that might be a tech startup, but it might be a hairdressing salon. But that governance, proper governance, is the best way to run those businesses. And I think it is important, as they become more successful, that the sort of the Ubers of this world, and I do think Uber's a great company that's achieving a huge amount for consumers and for society, start maturing in terms of their governance structure. Regulators, regulators will step in on pay if businesses don't curb pay themselves. And I think the point that was raised there is absolutely right. I don't mind the threat, the ultimate threat of government action as a backdrop to voluntary effort. Britain did not have to impose quotas for women on boards by legislation. Instead, the government, by waving its arms in the air, achieved a situation where we have almost 30% female representation on FTSE 100 boards, and something like 45% of new non-executive directors are women. So it's kind of getting there.
Is it fast enough, though?
I think in Britain's made a lot of progress, more progress actually than the countries that have legislated for it. And I think what you don't want is a situation as in Norway, where there's an outstanding businesswoman who's on 23 different boards, because you can't be on 23 different boards. You know, no human being can sensibly be giving attention to 23 different boards. So I'm as worried about an old girls' club as I am in this country about the old boys' club that's dominated for so long. I just think, I'm not against regulation in principle. There are areas where regulation is necessary, particularly regulating for competition. That's the most important part of regulation in our societies. But I do think it ought to be a backstop.
Great, thank you. Time is up, so I can really leave you each with a parting thought.
Okay. The startups make their life simple. It's make that as simple as possible. I'm working with some people who have launched startups. I'm impressed by their maturity in understanding why they are here and why they do what they do. Panama Papers, I would just say, not agree with what was said. It's obviously very, very, very bad news, but let's also there be rigorous. Rigorous in the way it has been discovered, in the way names have been put in the press for people who legitimately did it, and which created also some. So we have everything. It's not because there is a good intention that the means are always good. Saying the reverse. Huh? So let's be rigorous in the way we analyze even that one. And the last point I would make, I saw this chart on the consumer, the importance of the consumer's behavior as to the change. I hope the chart will be true. It is not shown up to now. It is not shown. I heard what Bertrand said, and let's hope he's true also on that. Let's not be cynical. But for example, the sales of Volkswagen have not diminished, and the consumers are not, except in some cases like Nike, for example, when with the children's work in factories. There are not many examples where the consumer's behavior has had an effect on the company's level of responsibility. Let's hope the future will show that the chart is true.
Thank you. On startups and responsible behavior of starting companies, I would still say that the best the government can do is give freedom, stay away. Because I trust the next generation in that sense. And I would not intervene that much. And maybe if there is a call from the next generation for improving the curriculum or for coming up with some regulation or some programs, yes, then respond. But as a politician, do not take upon your shoulders a responsibility that you should shape the moral compass of new, young, starting up entrepreneurs. On the Panama Papers, I have two.
I think we should.
Yes.
Really conclude.
Yes. On the Panama Papers, there is the illegal tax evasion, and there is also the legal tax evasion. And I think, and I commend the free press that we have in this world for bringing also on the table the moral debate about what I call the legal tax evasion. This is a good sign that although companies may say, well, a government should not regulate too much, companies also cannot say it is legal and therefore it's morally justified.
Great. Great way of finishing. Thank you very much. Let's thank our panelists.